So, as most of you know, I'm Zack Boyd.
Almost.
He just told you that. And there's two things that you probably know about me. So if you've talked to me for about 10 minutes, I've probably worked it into the conversation that I worked at a farm for 3 years. If you've looked at the way I dress, you can probably guess that I'm an earth systems major. So I want to talk a little bit about those two things and why they matter so much to me. So first I'll talk about the environmental issues. So what really got me into environmentalism was a book I purchased in 8th grade. Great book, if you want to borrow it, I still have it. Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey. And that book inspired me to start searching for some new experiences in the outdoors. So ultimately I found a group called the Student Conservation Association, applied, and I was placed in Lake Clark National Park in Alaska the summer after my sophomore year. Another experience I talk a lot about. And that was an amazing experience, and it really opened me up to the two kinds of knowledge that you can pick up through a very direct experience like that. There's the practical knowledge, which is how to use the tools, how to communicate with your leaders, things that are very narrow and limited. And then there's something more general, general kind of knowledge. And I think a good way to illustrate that is an experience that I had on that crew, when our crew took a trip up a place called Holy Mountain. And it was the first time we could see over it. So our camp was down in a valley on the other side, and we could see into the valley on the other side. And on this side of the mountain, there was just nothing. There were hundreds of unnamed mountain peaks, and this valley was just empty. And it was huge. I was amazed, because I'm from Pennsylvania, and the space was just gigantic. Like, you could see to the other peaks, and it was just such a big space that you're not used to seeing. Just full of nothing. And down in the valley, for a moment, I could see, like, if that valley had existed in Pennsylvania, how it would have looked, which would have been a road running down the middle, development creeping up on the sides of the mountains. But instead, there was nothing there. And it made me realize something that I probably couldn't have realized from sitting through 1,000 environmental science lectures, which is that these national parks aren't just about acreage, they're also about protecting something that's completely outside of human control. So that's one kind of open space I found myself looking across. So another kind was at the farm. Now, when I tell people I work at the farm, they're like, oh, of course, you like the outdoors. Like, of course you work at the farm. And the reality of it is that farms are not very natural at all. As you could guess, I was paid basically $8 an hour to spray herbicides that ultimately seeped into the same water I drank. And, raise cattle, which is so much water. But there was one experience that really demonstrated something important to me, and that's that there was one day that me and my boss were putting a hitch onto the tractor. It doesn't mean much. But it was just the stupidest hitch design. Like, it was idiotic. And like, I said to him, like, why would anyone design a hitch like that? Like, there's 2 sets of pins and dumb stuff like that. And he looked at me, and this was right after I got into Stanford this summer. He looked at me and he said, it's probably because someone in college designed it. But what he was saying is that these people, like, they sit in their classes and they read about the theory of the design, but they do not use the very things they're designing. And that's something else important. Like, where I come from, a rural community, the vast majority of people do not go to a college, especially not a college like this. Most go to state schools, most go into the workforce. So I've been given a pretty amazing opportunity, in my opinion, to be at a place like this with everyone here. And it's something I really need to keep in mind pursuing a topic like environmental sciences, which also is not trusted very much in rural communities. Keeping in mind the relevance and the importance of working at places like farms, working on trail crews, as opposed to just doing studies that will get published in some academic journal and then potentially be forgotten. And it reminds me of, 2 quotes. So the first is, there are 2 spiritual dangers in not owning a farm. One is the danger of supposing that breakfast comes from the grocery, and the other is that heat comes from the furnace. And these are very basic things that we associate with those 2 things, breakfast and heat, but they're not necessarily where they come from. There's a deeper meaning behind them. And the other is from James Joyce, and that's that the only writer is he who writes. So you can sit around all day thinking about writing, but until you actually put a pen to the paper, you're not a writer. And that applies to all disciplines, including environmental science. And I think the most crucial thing is understanding the importance of my studies beyond the classroom. There's a huge urban-rural divide. It's like a mega Stanford bubble across this country. I mean, if you don't believe me, like, look at an election map. And really, I got to think about why I'm here. So is that to get rich? To be rich for however long I live? 80 years if I'm lucky, maybe 20, who knows? Is it to come up with a new concept that may be important in academic circles, but ultimately for the vast majority of people, they'll have to memorize it in high school environmental science class and then forget about it in their daily life? Or is it to do something that actually will impact society and have an influence on how we view the world? And I think that the fact that I've been given that opportunity is something, is a very good reason to think about this education and what the opportunities it's given to me. Thank you.